hot things going on in marketing today, because it's changing very, very fast due to technology. And then we're going to talk about how marketing and the other roles in the C-suite work together, because I know in the audience we have professionals from finance and IT and sales and operations and HR, and there's a real important need to understand how to work together in the C-suite, because a C-suite that works together well tends to be an outperforming organization. So try to make it relevant to you guys. So first I want to have everybody spend a minute or two introducing themselves, because I can't do justice to all the capabilities of these people. So I'll start with you, Maureen.
Good morning, I'm Maureen Schumacher. I began my career at GE Capital, working in the marketing, global marketing in the US and Europe and Asia Pacific, and did a lot of work with some of our new acquisitions, some of the due diligence, and bringing companies into the fold and new product development. From there, I moved over to Google for 7 years and really built the Google presence in the Southeast starting in 2006. We were about 12 people, and when I left, 7 years later, we were over 100. So we've got a great presence in the Southeast. Was pulled over to teaching at Georgia State. While I was at Google, I was a Google Fellow, so got my doctorate. Taught for a little bit, but got very enticed by Jeff Sprecher's business, which is ICE, Intercontinental Exchange. So joined them 2 years ago to help integrate all of the marketing for the New York Stock Exchange, which has been my focus for the last couple of years.
My name is Tim Palmer, and I started my career in sales at Procter & Gamble. Great boot camp to really understand the thought process and how people make decisions and so forth. From there, I got into marketing at Pepsi USA, and from Pepsi, I went to Polaroid, where I did a whole bunch of different things, from regional marketing in the US to new product development. Went over to Europe and ran marketing in Europe for 4 years, and then came back and was general manager of the consumer and business imaging division for Polaroid for a couple of years. After that, I worked at a couple of startups, and then in 2007, I moved from Boston to Atlanta to take a job with Eastman Kodak Company, running the consumer and commercial marketing for the Americas, North and South America. Great experience. I'm still working with Kodak. At this point, I'm helping to develop a strategy, marketing, and business development game plan for the 1,200-acre industrial park in Rochester, which, believe it or not, has 60 companies operating in it. It used to be just Kodak. Now there are 60, from energy storage to food processing, agriculture, a new industry called photonics. So it's very exciting. And I'd love to talk about it. So if you're interested, let's talk later.
Great. Good morning, I'm Mike Lange. I spent about 20 years of my early career in the consumer electronics business. I worked for companies like Sony and then Philips, which was how I ended up here coming to Atlanta about 17 years ago. I left Philips, went to work for Mannheim, which is, was sort of an interesting transition, because when you talk about working for Sony or you talk about working for Philips, people generally have a pretty good idea of those brands and those companies, and they think they know what you do, whether they do or not. And then I ended up at Mannheim, which was, unless you work in the automotive industry, is pretty much under the radar, and a company that very few people have heard of, and also a process that very few people really think about or have ever participated in. Mannheim operates used car auctions in about 120 locations around the world, and it's a really interesting business. We'll talk about it, I think, as we get into some of the panel discussions. I left Mannheim at the end of 2010, and I've been working in consulting with North Island for the last 4 years or so.
I'm Amy Walker-Bars. I got my MBA at Emory and started right after that at Kimberly-Clark in the business-to-business division. So we sell some of those same Kleenex brand, and later we bought Scott Paper Company, so the Scott Paper brands, to hotels, hospitals, office buildings, manufacturing. And then I left Kimberly-Clark after 20 plus years, spent a year sort of giving back, doing teaching at Emory, executive in residence there. And then now I'm the director of brand strategy at Teradata, which does data processing, data analytics, and marketing applications until those businesses sell. So I have really enjoyed doing from low-tech like toilet paper and paper towels to high-tech like data processing. So I've really enjoyed learning so much about different businesses, but one thing in common is we all sell to both B2B to almost every kind of vertical. So it's really a matter of really understanding the business-to-business purchase process and how that's different and how to make the most for your company and set it apart.
The fun thing about doing this in December is this is when all the predictions of what's hot in 2016 is going to happen. And so did a little survey of what everybody has to say, whether it was IDC or Forbes or the CMO clubs on LinkedIn. And so we picked these 4 topics to drill into so you would understand what's top of mind right now in marketing as we go forward. So the first question is really around customer experience. And so we all as consumers know what it's like to have Amazon send us notes that may or may not be relevant. But customer experience is incredibly important across B2B and B2C. And so Mike, I want to have you talk about this a little bit. You were a pioneer with some of the stuff you were doing with Mannheim. What was really hard and how has that evolved over time since it's been a journey?
Sure. We started a customer experience initiative in Mannheim in, I think, 2005 or 2006, which was fairly early in, at least the visibility around customer experience as a theme. I think Forrester got very active about publishing and consulting around customer experience right about that same time. What was interesting at Mannheim was there was a real need for that customer experience focus at that point of time in the business. Auto auctions have traditionally been a very local business. So if you imagine, used car auctions are basically the stock exchange for used cars, right, to put it into sort of an analogy. And dealers who have vehicles that they can't sell at retail and need to wholesale them, bring those cars to the auction. Dealers that need inventory for lots, used car lots, buy cars at the auction. So it's essentially a clearinghouse for that inventory and that capital. Historically, it was a very local business. Dealers would go to a local auction every Thursday. It was, filled both a business and a social function. They went every week, whether they had business to transact or not, because they saw their friends there. And it operated very locally for probably 40 or 50 years. Around the time we got active with the customer experience focus, the fundamentals of the business were really changing. We had introduced online buying so that you could buy using online tools. And also the industry on the retail side had started to get much more sophisticated. CarMax came in, and if you know the history of CarMax, came out of Circuit City. And CarMax came in and essentially started to run the used car business like a retail business. And they had buyers who came to the auctions, and they weren't looking around to see what looked like a good deal today or what can I make some money on. They were coming with buy orders that said, we need to buy today 13 mid-size sedans between $12,000 and $15,000, 4 pickup trucks between $20,000 and $25,000, 8 subcompact cars, because they had that sort of predictive analytics about the business, and they had the perspective of what are we going to be retailing 3 and 4 weeks from now, and how do we get that inventory. And so that brought a level of professionalism that was a completely different thing. Well, the experience challenge at Mannheim was that we had always had a very hands-off orientation of the business. We let those businesses run locally, and the general managers basically did what they needed to do to be successful. But they did it in a way that it really didn't matter if there was a lot of consistency from location to location, because you dealt with the same people week in and week out. As those two fundamentals changed, the online buying and the professionalism, and people started to buy at multiple locations, suddenly we had a customer base, maybe 20% of the population, but 80% of the buying that wanted that experience to be the same, whether they went to an auction in Los Angeles or Chicago or Orlando. And that was really why that was so urgent for us at that point in time. It was not so much driven by the rise of customer experience as a theme, but it was really an imperative of the business and the transition that the business was going through from a very local orientation to a much more of a national footprint.
So that's a great story of disruption causing
Right.
an early need for
Right.
customer experience work. Any examples from Maureen, Tim, or Amy you want to throw in on customer experience? No. Just know that this is a huge initiative with many consulting projects behind it. Probably going on in companies you know today.
Well,
Yeah, and
I can jump, because
Yeah.
we actually just saw a briefer from Lange, so we've engaged with a company called Lange on our customer experience model. And if you think about New York Stock Exchange, which is the customer experience model, but a lot of what we are is the trade floor and then the electronic exchange in the past, in the background, well, foreground. But a lot of it is, you know, the whole experience of coming to the exchange and the bell ringing and the ballroom. And it's an area that hasn't been really looked at for 25 years. So, you know, things like when you go to the Football Hall of Fame, you know, what that experience is like, you know, we're really trying to update that entire experience, bringing things like technology and that seamlessness between technology and the history, which is kind of difficult to do, and then looking at things like augmented reality, etc. So it feels very fresh and relevant, but it's extremely important.
I just want to mention a book that's very worthwhile in the experience. I mean, it's called The Experience Economy.
Yeah.
It's a James Gilmore book, and I spent a lot of time in hospitality, and so we're constantly working on how we're evolving the experience and extending the experience and so forth. So that book addresses retail and B2B and hospitality and so forth. It's good for everybody.
Yeah, I've got, I guess, a little to add now. It's kind of stimulated some thoughts. So this past spring and summer, I was, or still am, looking at potentially buying a business. And I've been focusing in B2B service arenas. And one of the things that's happening now, and it's happened previously in some other parts of the world, but a lot of B2B businesses that have been kind of mom and pop, they call it chuck in a truck kind of things, are being reorganized around customer experience. It's not that the actual service itself is changing, it's the professionalism of how do you contact them. What happens when you contact them? Can you get an appointment when you want it? Do they show up on time? Do they look professional, have a uniform? Do they follow up? You know, so there's deep thought going into disrupting a lot of these mom and pop industries that are still out there today around customer experience.
And I just, one more thing is that another dimension of that is the difference between your online experience and your in-store experience. We as consumers expect that to be integrated and seamless. And when you go to a store and you say, well, this happened to me online, and they say, oh, well, that's a different group. That's not what we as
Right.
consumers don't find that acceptable. So that's another dimension to the experience piece.
Yeah. I'll just maybe make one other point. Sorry, but
Then we move.
but you.
Darcy's got me on a clock.
But I'd also kind of remember it. You know, I'd say it's small C customer and big E experience. Everything a business does is about delivering an experience to somebody, and we focus a lot on that customer relationship, but the employee relationship and the employee experience is absolutely as critical. You can't deliver great customer experiences unless the employee experience is good. And then the other dimension are, you know, sort of channel partner experiences, right? How do you deal with third parties? How do you deal with retailers? So I always try to, you know, remind everybody to think about experience, and it's not only that customer realm that matters.
Yeah. Another great book on the topic, I'll just throw it out real quick.
So I guess this is our customer experience panel.
Okay, we're flexible.
I recommend B4B. You've heard B2B. This is kind of like the next generation, B4B. And it's all about designing customer success. So probably a lot of us have sold technologies or, you know, big expensive things, and once you've sold it,
Yeah,
like,
done.
okay, see ya. The new thing is, it's called success science. It's studying what makes a customer successful in using whatever it is that you're selling, the solution you're selling, and using that knowledge to help them be successful. And the measure of performance and how much you get paid is actually the success the customer has over time. I think that was relevant.
Yep.
Okay, next seat. We got two. Okay, one behind.
Jim also hangs here from
Okay, we got one right behind you there. Go ahead.
But amongst our group, Brian Wiedner is a Kettering member. Brian's whole experience is
Yeah.
the customer experience. He was just CMO at Elevon, is now
Yeah.
running his own business.
Oh.
I'm surprised he's not here in the audience, but if anyone's looking to network or resource, Brian Wiedner would be.
Yeah, I can vouch for Brian as well. I've known Brian for a while.
Jim?
Yeah, you can bring it up later. One of the biggest disruptor in customer experience thing is Uber.
Yeah.
I just thought it would be
Oh, yeah.
interesting to hear your comment. Doesn't have to be right now, but
Yeah.
because it hits about 3 or 4 of those.
Right.
The point I was trying to make was, normally people see it as a commodity when you're selling paper towel or something like that. Price matters. The moment you change it to experience, Like Starbucks coffee, you don't know how many
Right.
cents went into the thing. So from marketing pricing point of view, you want to make it more experience driven rather than commodity price margins. and things like that.
All right, let's go on to the next C. So in marketing, probably the last 3 or 4 years, content is king. It's kind of been the mantra. But it's coming out now that marketers are spending about 50% of their time developing and managing content. So Tim, I wanted to get your perspective on how hard it is to deliver that content, the difference you saw between what happened in B2B versus B2C. Any comments on that whole content arena that's just popped up and sucked up a lot of resources?
The content's a fascinating space, and you might think, well, what is content? I mean, it's basically anything. It could be written, it could be pictures, it's video, could be at a trade show. What's the booth look like? A speech, you name it. All of those things are considered content. And one of the things that's changing dramatically in our society is the way people like to consume content. So a couple of years ago, my teenage son wanted to build a computer from scratch, from parts. And as I thought about it, I immediately thought, oh, I would go buy a how-to book,
Mhm.
you know, Barnes and Noble, or maybe order it online at Amazon. He didn't even think of that. He went straight to YouTube and watched videos and did it all based on videos. So it's just an example of the generational difference in how people learn. So from a content perspective, one of the things you have to do is keep in mind that there are multiple ways that people want to search for and learn about things. So it could be, you know, there's a website called SlideShare.
Yep.
I like to go there a lot of times because there are often slide presentations from trade shows or whatever that break down a complex topic and provide a point of view that you can grasp really quickly and maybe steal and use.
Let it borrow or influence.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a great resource. Another thing that you see more and more is what's called an infographic. I actually printed one out for you. This is one graphic that is quite long, so you can't print it out on one page. But what it does is it takes a complex idea, and in this case it's the relationship between sales and marketing and how to connect with customers. It takes a complex idea, uses facts and figures and pictures, and allows you to grasp it really quickly and use that information for whatever purposes you have. So that's another example of how content is evolving. But one of the things that is persistent out there, and I wonder if, you know, if you go around, if you'll think of this, is that a lot of companies and a lot of individuals still think that it's about them and not about who they're talking to. So I'm on an advisory panel for a startup company in Atlanta. It's a great company, you know, really smart people, wonderful ideas. But yesterday they sent me an introductory presentation that they did for a potential new client. And the first 10 slides were all about them. There was nothing about the client or the client's industry or what their problems might be. So, you know, you spend the first 10, 15 minutes where you really have their attention talking about yourself, and then they kind of go in comatose. I mean, so one of the really important things around content is to make sure you know exactly who you're talking to. If you can get it down to individuals, titles, you know, industries, what are the things that are board level concerns for them? You know, like it's in their annual report. These are the things we're working on. And if you can identify those, talk about those first, and then eventually get to how you might be able to help them address those problems, that's how you're going to be successful. So whenever I judge content, I think first about who is it you're talking about, what are their problems, and, you know, how do we connect at the end.
So Tim, that's a great setup for where I want Amy to talk a little bit, which is one of the other big, thank you, Marcy, is big data. And I don't know how much of you in the consumer press see big data, but it is huge all over business. And to get to this, knowing who you're presenting to have the content, you really need to have data analytics built into marketing at every level. So I want to see if you've had some observations, having been in marketing and now being in a big data company, what it means for marketers.
I think it's, you know, it's interesting in working with Emory, some of the people I've talked to there about the marketing students, they say, well, some of the marketing students get a little bit, you can divide in the ones who are afraid of the analytics and the ones who are, you know, licking their chops and can't wait to get into the analytics. But a good marketer must be comfortable doing the analytics. And in my mind, this is heyday for marketers, because now you have the analytics to document why you want to do something and to illustrate the consequences of what happens. So it really depends on what business you're in, what kind of analytics you have. I heard a great quote, it'll never be simpler than it is today. So it's only going to there's only going to be more data, and it'll only be more complicated, which for us as marketers is a good thing. You know, so we know more and more about our customers. Our customers expect us to know more and more about them. They expect you to log on your website and say, welcome back, Amy. Since you were last here, these 3 things have come up you might be interested in. This just anonymous customer treatment is no longer acceptable by most customers. And then to be able to, you know, know what your customers know about you before they get there. So I think I was talking with somebody before we started about in the business-to-business world, about 50 to 60% of the buyer's journey happens before they contact you. So where does all that learning takes place? It takes place mostly, like you were saying, online. People are doing research, and so you have to understand what you want your website to say. Sometimes you have to talk about yourself. People come to your website because they want to know what you do. So that's one thing we sort of challenge our customers is make sure you have a clear statement about what it is you do when they get to your website. So make that clear. So I think all that data of the customer's journey, what you know about them before they come to you, what they told you about themselves. But in the retail world, I'll just give you one example, which I think is a great one. 7-Eleven, they're not as big in our area, but they're huge in other parts of the country. They have a fabulous customer program where they take customer preference data through a loyalty program, time of day, and weather. And they send a push message to somebody and they say, Jim, we happen to know that it's hot where you are and that you like salty snacks. And so at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to send you a push notice that says, pretzels are on special, and if you get a Coke to go with it, here's 50 cents towards that. Here's the closest 7-Eleven. So you sitting there in your car at a stoplight, you get this push notification, you say, you know what, I think I'll go to 7-Eleven. So I think this ability to take that data and turn it into a very personalized and put your company at an advantage over others is really where it's headed.
Yeah. Weather Channel is also a really
Weather
interesting
Channel.
example of using that microdata in some creative
Yep.
ways. I know one of the stories about Weather Channel is if you're a woman and you have frizzy hair and it's humid out, you're going to see certain conditioner ads in the Weather Channel page. they're down to sort of that level, and they really sort of push the boundaries on, you know, what does weather impact.
Yep.
Now IBM is going to add Watson to that condition.
Yeah, they already do. They interact with
Yeah, I think that's a big announcement.
weather and other.
Michelle, you got a comment or question?
Well, again, having been in hospitality for a long time, and they were the starter really of loyalty programs, it's amazing in these huge, I mean, one of the clients that I work with is 80 million worldwide loyalty members. And every interaction that you have with them, whether it's through your call center, your website, your check-in at kiosk, what have you, they're collecting more information on you so they can target and recognize when Amy travels with her husband, you know, she doesn't use a down pill because he's allergic to down.
Right.
And when she travels to this particular brand for this type of stay occasion, she brings her pet. And so that you know these things about them, and the call center or the website, when you do a direct buy, rather than go through Expedia or what have you, because they really frown on you using the online travel agents, they are driving a very personalized experience to you. And it's not creepy anymore because you volunteered that information. So anyway, it's fascinating to me that they can take 80 million customers and talk to you about your stay occasion when you go to Virginia with your pet.
So,
Okay.
your comment, and then we'll move on to the next one, because I want to make sure we get to everybody. The CMO of IBM 3 or 4 years ago had a statement that was very aspirational at the time, but I think, Amy, you said it, is the idea was marketing is so effective, it feels like a service to you. So you're not being marketed at, you're being served based on your needs, and it really kind of brought it to life. So I'm gonna move on to mobile. Who remembers how much money was spent over mobile on last Friday? 4.5 billion.
Oh my goodness.
It was huge. I mean, so mobile is amazing, and it's also from a marketing perspective, over 50% of digital spend. So Maureen, I wanted to get your perspective on mobile since all your experiences with Google and how social and mobile tie together. So any comments on mobile and where that's going?
Yeah, so I was really excited when Carson said, "Oh, you've got mobile, Maureen." I'm like, okay. And mainly because, you know, there's pivotal points in your career where you're like, you know, something happens and you like have a visceral moment or something. But we had a moment at Google when the lines, now this is really geeky, but when the lines of desktop searches, so here's desktop search volume, but then here's mobile search volume, they actually crossed, and mobile search volume started to surpass desktop, and that was like, oh my gosh, whoa. So, you know, well, we had always had a very mobile strategy, but then it started, you know, Larry and started getting mobile first, mobile first, mobile first. So, and that was probably 5 or 6 years ago. The indications are that next year there will be over $100 billion in marketing advertising spent on mobile ads. So that's fairly significant. For us and business owners and business consultants and, you know, people working in the business, you know, your website is extremely important, but now it's the responsive design and its ability to be discovered via mobile and engaged with via mobile is extremely important. We've known for years it's important. For the last 18, 24 months it's important, and probably words like responsive design are a part of your IT departments now, or part of your nomenclature. But it's even more important now since, as of April, Google changed their search algorithms. So if you have a mobile responsive, mobile friendly website, you're going to have a higher, you're going to rank higher in the natural search results. And this is fairly significant because if you fall out of the first 3 search results, you see about a 90% reduction in the volume of searches to your site. So for example, ICE and the New York Stock Exchange, we get 30 to 40% of our volumes to our site through Google searches. So if you take away 90% of that, that's fairly significant. So it was interesting. People's consumption patterns have shifted significantly, we understood. We started to understand that we needed to revise our our mobile strategies, but now that should have been done and people are moving forward. So the travel industry, financial services, and healthcare are very advanced in that area, and insurance. Areas like education, utilities are sort of laggards still, but the people who are advanced are really moving on to other things and being able to gauge you in deeper ways on mobile as well. So it's a great space.
So I wanted to shout out Randy. Randy is here and has a strong not-for-profit background, and I think that's important being in Atlanta that we get a perspective. So just wanted to get your perspective of, if you were to look at the list of 4 that we talked about as top issues, what do you feel is going to be first priority in the not-for-profit arena to get your arms
Before
around?
that, ask him why he has not attended meeting.
Welcome, Randy. Thank you for coming.
When was he attended last week?
Thank you, Marcy, I really appreciate the love. Back to you. I would say it's 1A will be customer experience tied with 1B content.
Okay.
What we're seeing in the nonprofit space, historically, when many of you give to nonprofits, your relationship begins and ends with the donation. And historically what happens is nothing develops from there. And so we get comments that the only time you come around is when you want money. And so what we're trying to do now in the nonprofit space is to develop relationships with you. Many of you have time, talent, and treasure. And we're trying to figure out how do we integrate those three. And we're understanding that we have to start dating you before we consummate the relationship. Okay? And dating you means finding opportunities through engagement, how you can interact with us, whether it's through sharing your skill set, sharing your time, those types of things. And so what we're seeing now is that we have to start acting like a business. Even though we are a nonprofit, the nonprofit is really just a tax business. We have to be ourselves, just like a business, because our product or service is quite honestly, is food. And that is much harder to sell than sugar water or an envelope or something like that. So those things are very important to us, and we're realizing that the internet and mobile technology is the first place you will go to in order to find out more information about nonprofits. So we are becoming, the lines are blurring between us. And unfortunately, we're not moving at the pace of business, but we're trying to get there.
Great,
I'll
thank
give you one good nonprofit example,
Okay.
American Cancer Society. They do
Stand up,
exactly
man,
what
stand up.
Randy described, and they do a fabulous job of working with their donors. In addition, they use, they have a whole nother database that they use to manage their volunteer interaction, and then finally they use data as part of their research. So, I mean, there's just as Randy mentioned, it's definitely a business, and there's so many more opportunities than just the
The guy
donor
who put
interaction.
it together is here, the Chief Information Officer, please stand up.
Oh, fabulous job.
All right,
Fabulous
so
job.
you mentioned Forrester. So Forrester had a big
Talk about
influence.
ACS first.
Yes, absolutely. The use of personas was
Yeah.
something that we started with about 5 years ago to actually get to know you better,
Yeah.
to complete what Randy talked about. So I'll leave it at that. I'm not there anymore, so I really can't talk to what they're
Well, you
doing.
did a great job.
Thank you.
Okay, so this has been great dialogue. I want to at least give us about 5 minutes so each of you can see yourself and how you're going to partner with your marketing partner, is the different professions you've got here. So we'll go through this pretty quickly, but I think it's really important for you to think about in your profession what marketing means and how you need to work with them. So first, CIO, Mike, when you were at Mannheim, your whole product was IT. How did that relationship work or not work? Are you seeing changes in how those are going
Yeah,
forward?
absolutely, a lot of changes, and I think that CIO marketing, CMO relationship is probably one of the most critical, and it's interesting in that, it is really a Venus and Mars sort of environment, right?
Totally.
CIOs for decades have been rewarded on, uptime and nothing breaking, and when you want nothing to break and you want complete reliability, that means you don't change anything very readily, right? And marketers, on the other hand, want to do something different every day or try new things all the time. So it is really an interesting challenge, and we see a lot of organizations working through that. And I think the sort of typical CIO profile is starting to change a bit in that regard, and also there's certainly maturity in the marketing tools, things like Teradata products or the Adobe suite, are starting to come in and be legitimate enterprise level kind of applications to run, the whole gamut of marketing requirements.
Yeah, I think that's the one that's written up the most in the press about how the need for that relation needs to go.
Actually, Gartner came up with a report maybe 2 years back or something, saying the chief marketing officer's spend on IT has surpassed
Yeah.
IT spend by
Yeah.
CIO.
Right.
So
By
that
2017.
kind of sent a chill to the IT community.
Yep, absolutely. Fear.
Well, that's a very good point, because I see, like, we just went through the budget process, and there was a lot of technology and tools that were in my budget. And we had a lot of conversation of like, where should this actually sit? And I basically was like, well, I don't care as long as it gets paid. But, it's starting to really happen that way. And I've been working hard at the technology sale because of, we basically are a tech platform, especially at ICE. And I think it's very interesting for a marketer because I'm feeling even pushed upstream more into user experience and user design, which is not necessarily an area where I have a skill set and expertise. If you think of the whole realm of what marketing does from brand strategy to customer experience, blah, blah, blah. Now I'm starting to get pushed into this area where I'm like, I'm not really, but I can figure it out. But, and then having to partner even closer with people who are like architectural design, and really having that symbiotic relationship at a new level, which I personally hadn't had to experience before, is really interesting, in case anybody's been there.
So Amy, you have been very involved in working with the brand and working on talent and working on culture. How has it been trying to work with HR? What works, what doesn't? Where do you see those relationships going?
So I think that you have to understand that the brand is not really activated until it's been activated internally. And, your employees have to be, you're really living the brand. What was your quote from IBM?
Oh, yeah, brand and culture are authentically one.
authentically want. So it must be the same thing. So no matter whether your business is extremely customer facing, in other words, all your employees actually interact with customers or not, it's just as important. There's a great case study about US Gypsum, used to be US Gypsum, now USG. In the depth of the depression they decided this was the perfect time, or the recession, perfect time for a rebranding. And where did they start? They took what's left of their employees after massive cuts, and they decided to do a brand transformation. They made them brand ambassadors, and that turned around the company in terms of just really allowing people to live the brand and experience it. And it has, you could decide, depending on your role, which is the primary and which is the secondary benefit. But in either case, you get two. One is that your employees are more engaged, they're more excited, they're more happy to be there, your turnover goes down. And the second is that they really communicate that in every interaction with your customers. And so those two things must go together. They must live the brand. And it doesn't even matter if it's knowing exactly what the 6 things your brand stands for. If one of those is sustainability, for example, and the environmental aspect of that is important to you, the person who orders office supplies is going to do so differently and approach office supplies differently if that's important. It's just part of the fabric of how you live your life and how you bring that brand to life with every single person. Whether you do, for example, at Teradata, we've always been recognized by Ethisphere. That's really important to Teradata, the ethics. I happen to sit near the tax people. The tax people, they know this. This is really important about everything that they do, and they're going to err on the side of extra conservative, extra careful, because they want to make sure that that ethics is just steeped in who we are and what we do. So it's just part of that. Living the brand internally is really a benefit, both as marketers and as HR leaders.
So, CFOs. How many CFOs love to question marketing on their return?
I think
So Maureen,
it's sport.
it is. So Maureen, you've had to, in many sides of the equation, try to convince the financial teams the value of marketing, return on marketing. What have you seen that works? What advice do you have? Because it really is probably, I think, one of the toughest C-suite relationships of marketing and finance.
No, it is, because it's the first thing that's usually cut, as if a company is going through any type of belt tightening exercise. It was interesting because, for Google and going into digital media, which was a shift from traditional media, which was really how many impressions are we buying on TV, how many impressions are you getting by people driving past a billboard. The beauty of digital media was it was very quantifiable. You could see who was engaging. You could watch the person going down the sales funnel. You knew how many leads you were generating. And then through things like attribution, you could actually understand when they're online, and then sometimes in the store, how the online experience was going into the store and then resulting in the sale. So digital kind of has changed the landscape significantly because it's accountable and measurable and can show a strong ROI. So that was something that we sold for years at Google. And we sold against traditional media, and every year we could see traditional media dollars flowing over to the Google. And we would say things like, they're following the customer eyeballs, but from the CFO level, it was measurable, I'm gonna put it there, because I'm comfortable with that. That we won't cut. And we saw that in like 2008, when things dipped and the budgets got cut significantly. I remember coming back from Christmas doing a bunch of budget work with large clients, because the CFO came back from the holidays and was like, cut. And we were trying to retain our digital dollars. And we did to a large extent, maybe like a 10% drop where everything else was seeing the bottom coming out. So it became very quantifiable and measurable. But then we got into this situation where we almost created a problem for ourselves, because then we came into, well, I'm only gonna get that lead if I can pay $1.50 for it. And we started to get into new areas like YouTube and mobile, and sometimes you have to pay a little bit more to get different customers from different channels. So we almost created this self-fulfilling prophecy of like, we were so accountable that people weren't gonna spend more if they had to pay a little bit more. So then we had to sell against that and talk about the lean in and the quality. But the bottom line is that that's a very, very kind of tenuous relationship. And it goes a lot back to what Amy said, and the need for marketers to be very data-driven, analytic, and statistical. And if you know your business and you're monitoring and measuring and tied closely to the business and the ROI, then the relationship with the CFO is going to be very beneficial for you and not a detriment.
Embrace the data, it is your friend.
Data is your friend, yes.
Okay, one last one. Oh, let me.
Well, I keep thinking Amy starts the conversation, but you finish it on where that data exists. So last night at TAG BI Analytics group, Mike Thompson, who's in charge of analytics at CHOA, said it gets kicked around the C-suite. It goes to the CFO, it goes to the CIO, it goes back to the COO. He left off the CMO. Now maybe that's his industry, healthcare, but I was surprised that he didn't bring that up as we should own. So his answer was he's franchising it out. He's the BI analytics chief. He's franchising out to those different components to make sure they get what they need.
Interesting.
Very interesting. So, marketing and sales, how many conversations, Tim, have you been in on who really created that lead? Could you comment a little bit
Yeah,
on?
when you said CFO will be top critical person, I will say it is sales.
Yeah, the problem is that the CFO has the money, the sales guy has the attitude, right? Sorry. But, you know, this is a pretty important relationship. What are you seeing working, what isn't? What kind of conversations need to be had to build the kind of relationship you need between marketing and sales?
Yeah, when I think of marketing and sales and the relationship, usually where I start out is in the more complex sale. You know, Randy was talking about nonprofits, and with nonprofits, you want to get in front of people who have the means and the will to do something that's really going to make a difference for your charity. In order to do that, there's probably no one person who can bring everything that needs to be in the room to make that sale. And I think in industry and technology and so forth, it's the same kind of thing. And marketing, therefore, is becoming more and more of a partner to sales. What does marketing bring? A knowledge of the broad problems that target has. You know, what's going on in that industry, what's happening in the market, and so forth. Whereas the salesperson is more likely to have a deep understanding of the personalities and the politics and so forth internally. You probably need a product expert or two. You may need an outside expert, et cetera. So it's a team approach that includes marketing and sales really as partners. So that, to me, that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum would be maybe with the sugar water. I sold Pepsi for a while too, or marketed Pepsi. And in that case, the marketing is primarily focused on the end customer. So the relationship between the Pepsi and the end customer is fairly direct. The sales role is really to work with the channel or the retailer. So the discussions that they have certainly do talk about brand and, you know, how's the product doing in the market and so forth, but it's a much more commercial selling relationship. So that what marketing and sales do together in that environment is much different than what it is in the more complex sale at the other end.
Randy, any comments on which is first among equals as far as who you'd need to partner with in the partner in not-for-profit?
I mean, I would echo what all those individuals said. I mean, you know, one of the things I try to think about is it's like a basketball team. You have the point guard, your power forward. Everyone has a role, and I think it's up to the leadership, the CEO, to instill that belief that, you know, our success is based upon the individual efforts of us working collectively. Because in many organizations, and I think all of us would agree, the silos still exist, and the key is to eradicate or break down as many of those barriers as possible, and let the results speak for themselves as we work as a collective.
Yeah, the only comment I want to add before we go to the next chart to finish with any questions is what I found, having worked closely with sales in my marketing career, is predictive analytics to tell them where to sell next or what additional to sell to an existing client, the cross-sell, upsell. Bringing those analytics really brought value. So again, marketers have to love the data from that perspective.
And I think that content dimension now is also
Huge.
getting to be
Yeah,
more
the
and
thought
more
leadership
part of
of
that same
B2B,
type
yeah.
of relationship, yeah.
Yeah. Any questions before we comments? Yes, Michelle.
Just real quick, I'm curious about the test and learn component of what you do in marketing. There's so many great innovations out there, so many startups that can help a company leapfrog their competitors, but there's always this reluctance to work with startups, for example. And so how do you test and learn and validate that this is something we want to go forward at an enterprise level?
say just in my experience, I think there's a increased willingness to do that, that whole agile approach and pivoting and that sort of, agile marketing is just as important as any other part of that agility skill. So I think there's an increased willingness to test, whether it's A/B testing on the website, whether it's testing different ways of going to market, testing different product offerings, different service components, different pricing. I think there's an increased openness for marketers to test simply because you have to. And you just really want to see quickly what's going to, that fail fast and move forward mentality that allows you to pivot and say, okay, this one isn't working, we're going to go to this one, and then we're going to test more. We test A, B, and then B is better, so now let's test B, C, and see which one of those is better. I think you just have to in order to keep your company on the cutting edge.
I'll make 2 comments on that. There's a couple ways I've seen people get at it. One is, the senior marketing leader will say, I'm going to hold back 5 or 10% of my budget to do projects and examples to test innovation and expect failure. I've seen various IT CMOs speak to that. The other thing, the marketing organization that Maureen and Tim and I are involved in, the Georgia State Marketing Roundtable, is the last couple of years we've had a session with local startups in the marketing space. The first year was B2B, this year was B2C. What is going on here in Atlanta with marketing startups that these marketing leaders with Atlanta companies are looking at? So I think that's the other piece, is how do you pull in the innovation with startups? And so that's really done more community. Really, really large corporations have big, groups that work on, VC alignment. I know we heard the GE guy spoke about that, Mike somebody, and I know that's done at my former employer as well. But so, go ahead.
All right, so I would say to this slide up here, the relationship between your CIO and your CMO becomes critical when you're talking about the innovative products that come out, because that's
And
typically
analytics.
where the friction starts. Because if you can have both involved on the front end, they can make sure that all the systems work together to deliver, especially when it comes to the big data perspective that you were talking about before. Because if you can't tie it all together, then it probably isn't going to work well for the enterprise.
So the next title that I've been hearing about for the last 18 months, I'm sure you guys have too, is called the Chief Marketing Technology Officer, the CMTO. And so that is people are putting those sorts of things in place, or you're having IT departments have a marketing liaison, marketing have an IT liaison, because structurally and process-wise, it's not quite figured out yet, but yes.
Yeah, and of course, while we're talking about this, I think when you're talking about the B2C, because we've spoken a lot around, the retail, and certainly any companies that are doing anything in e-commerce are certainly aware of the changes that are happening, and anything from content to data to mobile gadget, whatever it is. But when you're talking about a lot of B2B companies, particularly in like capital products, like that are old school, that are used to, all right, I'm going to trade shows, I'm out in trade publications, and I'm sending sales guys out on the street schlepping samples, and that mindset is tough to get around, and so my question to you is, as you're talking to this group of people who have been used to that and are really kind of on the trailing end of where some of these, these trends are going, what would you tell them? Because they're not going to go from, having just a basic website and catalog to then having an automated marketing platform, overnight. They're going to want to take bites of the elephant as they go. What would you recommend to that group? Where do you start, to help them start to see those results and then invest from there?
We have a lot of B2B on this panel. Going through.
I'm thinking. I think it's a great question. I think there are one of the things that comes to mind is just how disrupted some of those businesses are starting to become. Amazon Marketplace, which has just fundamentally changed the wholesale selling relationship in B2B over the last couple of years. And I've seen a number of companies sort of in that situation that have gotten active in the thought leadership content area as a starting point. They've started blogs, they've started to talk about the expertise they have around the products that they sell, how they're used, and started to get some traction and momentum from an online presence out of that content marketing, and that sort of was the first step that got them started down that road.
Right.
But I don't think anybody's isolated anymore. Every business is, we may be toward the latter part of the cycle, but every business is feeling the impact of the environment being so different.
My advice is just to get working with the sales team to map out the customer's path to purchase, and trying to figure out where do your customers go to learn about your products, and how do you get to be teaching where they're going to learn? And I think, it's a real eye-opener for the sales team when you actually do customer interviews to find out, gosh, oh no, before I talked to you, I had already researched on 20 websites. Ding, ding, ding. That's what it takes for a salesperson to understand, oh, I see, I need help in this before they come to me part. And I think that path to purchase, just even pick one persona and start there. Just to pick your favorite buyer and start there and map it out and do customer interviews to find out exactly how did you learn about us before you contacted us. I think just very tangible.
I'll throw out one thing and then we'll go to Jacques.
We have limited time. Is there a slide?
It'll be 2 seconds. The other thing to talk to the team about is look at your customer set and how are the demographics changing, and get them to understand the difference on how Gen X buys and how millennials buy, because they're back there with their relationship that they had for 40 years. That's not going to be there that much longer. And so you've got to get them as the personalities that they're selling to as well. So Jacques, it is Jacques, right?
Sales.
Okay.
But on the last point you made, isn't this the fallacy of the internet that people spend time looking at, okay, I need a testing instrument, and for this kind of capacity, this kind of test, I find out there are 3 companies, or I already know 3 companies. I'm essentially doing self-diagnosis before I even speak. And self-diagnosis is essentially malpractice. When I work with sales team, one challenge is that people spend enough time online that they think they know it. But they'll find that instrument once every 5 years, once in their career. Well, the sales guys are selling them 1 a week or 1 a month. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think you got to have both.
Yeah, that's
You gotta
where
have both.
having the right content online when they're doing the search is critical. You know, because you're beginning the education process through marketing, and that needs to flow right through to your sales education and so forth.
So you're saying they'll trust the content more if they read it on the internet than they read it.
Absolutely, that is pretty yes.
That's why marketing's better, right?
And by the
We
same
need each
token,
other.
Steve Jobs didn't care about what the customer, he
Right.
cared,
Yes,
but he
yeah.
didn't ask them because he thought he knew what they wanted, they don't know what they needed.
Right.
Yeah, well, he was right. As it turned out, he was right.
Okay, so next year.
One more thing, speaking of malpractice, you're talking about good brands and protecting brands, internal and external. In one spot on the previous slide is chief counsel and how you protect the brand.
Yes.
Whether you're trying to cover it from a negative standpoint or a positive standpoint. Any experiences on that?
That's a great point.
So I work with chief counsel probably 4 times a week on brand issues. And you can imagine the number of people who want to use the New York Stock Exchange. So we trademark the bell, we trademark the facade, we trademark the name, and then a lot of people want to do photo shoots there. And then we have a trademark policy that was ICE, which was kind of lean, and then the New York Stock Exchange trademark policy, which was humongous, and then we had this humongous fees. It's funny you mentioned this because I've been going through this the last 6 weeks, of how to rationalize fees going forward and get the senior leadership team bought into a trademark policy that we can actually really defend without just paying a lot of fees out of the bottom. So I think on that one, it's really important for people to get their arms around what they have, because I think a lot of times in organizations, it took me a long time to get the attorneys to summarize what we have, what's trademarked, what countries, what sectors, and then what state that trademark is in. Is it finalized? Is it secured? Is it being challenged? So you got to get your arms around what you have, and then you've got to look at what's the policy that you got here and what's the policy going forward. And I've had a huge issue the last year and a half with IT. That is a product feature. That is a product functionality. That's not a brand. If we're going to do a midday auction, we don't need to brand that birds and then trademark it and then spend all of this money to defend it. So it's been a total mind shift. And the reality is if you're not active with that brand and investing in that brand, because we do a lot it doesn't cost that much, we're just going to protect it. Well, you're not protecting anything. You're just throwing it out the door, because then if someone wants that brand and you have to defend it, you have to show specimens. And if you don't have it, you've just wasted, it's a couple $100,000, but if you take a couple $100,000
Yeah.
by like
Lots of
200,
money.
right, so that's a huge piece. Understand what you have, understand what your strategy is, and then be prepared to implement that strategy across all level of the C-suite, because people will come at you from all different ways, like this we should trademark, this we should trademark, and you have to be able to say yes, no, and why.
I'd say the other part of that for corporate counsel is reputation management. And, you know, we used to have, with one corporate counsel I worked with, the New York Times headline test. You know, if what you're doing now were to be written about on the New York Times headline, how would you feel? How does that manage your company's
Yeah.
reputation? So I think that's an important part of employee. It's another important part why it's so important to get your employees engaged and understand your reputation management so that you can really protect your one of your biggest assets is your brand reputation.
Well, and as a use case, for example, there was a company using the facade, and we went back to the stock exchange, we went back to them and said, you know, you can no longer use it, and it was your traditional legal letter. This was before me. Your traditional legal letter, and that was in Business Insider. You know, like, this is a public place, why can't I use it? Why do they have to be so mean about it? So you have to be really very, very careful,
Mhm.
even when you're getting to a point where you're defending. So I'm trying to put in place where, okay, you're using it, we're gonna celebrate that you're using it because it's very important for public markets, but know that we know you're allowed to use it for a period of time, and not everybody can use it. So we're sort of taking a reverse approach to select people that are giving that ability to.
Okay, one last point. If we were here in a year, these are the topics that are coming at us really fast. So think about this as the future. Location-based marketing, sometimes creepy. Virtual reality, is that me? Search, getting beyond just the search engines, Internet of Things, gonna change our world, and cognitive marketing, where it's really smart. So that's what's coming at us. So thank this amazing panel that has this wealth of experience.